Welcome to Give It a Nudge. Today, finally, we have a guest who we have been trying to get on for, I think we were just discussing, close to 2 years, who's achieved a lot in that 2 years, and we wanted to get her on even before that. So super exciting to have Lucy here. And I can't say Lucy from anywhere because it's Lucy from all sorts of places. So Lucy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Why don't you give me and the audience a quick précis of where you are and what you're doing, because you're doing so many different things right now.
Yeah, for sure. So I run 2 companies. One of them is called Normal, and we do sex toys funding, free online digital sex education. So we're about 3 years old. And in the course of being a founder, supporting others, coaching different people in the startup world, I kept coming across the problem that a lot of us get taught very clear kind of subject matter skills like accounting or engineering or whatever in our degrees. But when you actually get into a career, there are these soft or generalist skills that become really vital to succeeding and flourishing. And so I set up a second company late last year with a co-founder, Harry Hamilton, called Fuzzy, to teach those skills. I also do other stuff as well.
Fuzzy and Harry Hamilton, 2 cool names in one business.
Harry
How
Hamilton
good?
Is such a good name.
It's such a good name.
It sounds like an old school, like a noir-y detective or something.
Harry Hamilton.
Or like Hollywood. Yeah.
And I can't believe Normal's only been going 3 years. Is that right? Is it really only 3 years?
It feels like 10.
So you must have picked up on you early, because we have been talking a long time.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we got lucky in some ways out of the gate, because launching a vibrator company into a global pandemic is a perfect time. Lots of people stuck at home, lots of discretionary income, no dating. So we had a lot.
They say you make your own luck, but I mean, timing is timing, right? I think every product in the world can benefit or be hindered by timing. No one's got control of that.
Definitely.
But before we get into all of those, I just want to frame you up a little bit, because let's talk about your background before you got into Normal, pre-Normal. Sure. Pre-Normal, isn't that a good way? I like that. Tell us a little bit about where you started out, because it's quite an interesting journey.
Yeah, I don't think 10 years ago I would have predicted I'd be doing this kind of work.
No.
It all makes sense going backwards. But I grew up in Brisbane. I ended up actually studying overseas. So I studied social sciences. So a combination of sociology, psychology, political science, economics, international relations, anthropology.
Jeez.
All of the different...
ologies.
Yeah, all of the ologies. And that was really driven by just being very curious about human beings and how we organize ourselves and how societies work. And also, I think, with a focus on how do you create positive social change on issues you care about. So that really drove a lot of that study for me. And I'd also always been very fascinated by businesses. So I remember my mum tells this story of, before I realized it was rude, I would just ask people how much money they earned, because I was genuinely curious, and I was like trying to figure out why is that thing worth more than that thing? Or,
I do that every day as a job. But I'm very comfortable asking people that. It comes out in social situations, which is not always awkward. And they go, "Oh, you can't ask that." And I forget, because I ask it every day. But you're right; it's still, people don't like it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd always just been very interested in businesses, and I think I really love the feeling of imagining something that doesn't exist yet and creating a business as a vehicle for that change or that new thing in the world. And so I'd been doing all this studying. I got the startup bug in university. So my first startup was a new student magazine at the University of Cambridge, founded with a couple of friends of mine.
In the UK?
Yeah.
My daughter wants to go.
Oh, well,
she just did summer school there. Well, it's not easy to get into from Australia, but she wants to do medicine as well. She's really setting that bar high. But it's a beautiful place.
It's wonderful. I think I didn't get the chance to fully experience the Australian tertiary education system, but one thing that I did really love about the UK, and this was kind of why I wanted to go, was that you would have these very small tutorials. So sort of a professor with 3 or 4 students reviewing your essays sort of 3 times every fortnight, and having these really intensive discussions where you get pushed to think quite originally, as opposed to, I think sometimes in Australia we're doing these mass education degrees, and it's hard to deliver that kind of experience, obviously, at that scale. But I think it was really valuable for just getting really pushed to think critically. So I loved that. Would highly recommend it for your daughter well.
And I think she enjoyed the punting too. But
the punting is great. Strawberries and cream, champagne.
Yeah. There's a lot of, but it is freezing and cold. But pluses and minuses. So the magazine. So was that purely for the within the university? It wasn't an external thing.
Yeah, it was just within the university. This is a very low stakes startup, but
low stakes startup's a good one.
I highly recommend it for anyone. I think particularly recovering Type A perfectionists. It's a really good way to overcome a lot of your
recovering.
blockers. Yeah, but for us, we were like, we looked around at all the newspapers on campus and we were thinking, well, a lot of these feel like they're either trying to imitate British tabloids on a campus, which is I had very little interest in, or that they were doing like a worse version of the BBC trying to do news reporting, which again, I was like, none of these are the comparative advantage of students, but we have this whole campus full of people who are actually really like thoughtful, interesting, can go very deep on topics. So we're like, we want to create something that feels more like the New Yorker or the Atlantic for the campus. But at one point we got cartoonified in one of the other student newspapers. They did like here's what every other paper on campus looks like as a person, and we were cartoonified as someone wearing a beret and a black turtleneck, smoking a cigar and sort of saying like peasants to all the rest.
You should definitely have kept that.
Yeah, it's out there somewhere. I need to find it.
It'll be there.
But yeah, that was I think what was good about that experience was going through the process of being like, what's the gap that's missing? And then thinking about, okay, how do we want to fill that? How do we want to create a really high quality product? Pitching other writers and editors and essentially sort of creating a brand out of nothing and saying, hey, like almost getting everyone to jump at the same time so that the brand actually does exist. And then going through the process of bringing on advisors and
how do you fund it? I was going to say, how did you fund it?
Yeah.
So who do you go to at a university to sponsor a paper?
Great question. I think we ended up, our first sponsor was a London-based consulting firm. So they were trying to recruit from campus.
Okay.
It was a good funnel to potential recruits for them. But we actually had an issue where our first sponsor fell through days before we were due to go to print, and we'd like lined up the foreign affairs editor of the New York Times through weird Cambridge
connections, alumni.
Yeah. Some kind of alumni thing to launch it for us. So we were a bit nervous about missing the launch and just looking like idiots, basically.
That's every startup's nightmare, right? With every launch.
Oh, totally. But it was actually great. Like, it was such a good experience to have to problem solve so quickly, and even in that circumstance, the stakes are not really truly high. No one died, but I think that was such a formative experience for me of doing something that felt quite different to the conventional path, and having to problem solve in that way. So anyway, we're
still at uni. We've got a way to go.
Yeah, I'm like, this is not my memoirs. But yeah, finished uni, moved to Berlin for a few months, had a great time, very sex positive environment, loved that. And then came back to Australia. I supported myself partly by doing consulting internships the whole way through uni. Those expensive overseas international fees.
Yes.
And I'd taken a job with McKinsey. So then I started as a management consultant at McKinsey, spent a couple of years there, and then moved into startup world. So.
I like the way you've just brushed over. You went to Cambridge and then you started at McKinsey. Two things that goodness knows how many people in the world try and do.
And there was also there was another degree between those, but I kind of just...
It's an impressive... It's a pretty impressive start, I think. So where'd you go from McKinsey? Often what happens with McKinsey people is they fall into one of the companies that they end up working with. That's quite common.
Yeah, definitely. And you'll also see, I think, trends in, exit.
Yeah.
What's the in vogue exit pathway? So at different points in time, it'll be corporate strategy. At different points, it'll be private equity. At different points, it's been startups and tech. I suspect at the moment, slightly less so. But
I would
5
think
years
so.
ago, yes.
I reckon it's back to private equity now.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it's back to private equity right now. So I think I knew very early on with McKinsey that I was like, this is probably not going to be for life, but it's a valuable skill set for me.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. And left, but wasn't sure I essentially, when I was there, I was like, I don't think I'm going to have the headspace to make a good decision about what I want to do next while I'm here. And so left without a job to go to, and then had like a delightful period of 18 months of like glorified testing and fucking around, which is awesome. I don't know if I can swear on this show.
You can swear on this show.
So glorified testing and fucking around for 18 months, in which I tried out a whole bunch of different things. For a while I thought I might be a playwright. That's not going to happen, but
well, that's left field.
Yeah. But helpful nonetheless. I can write reasonably well now, which has actually turned out to be
which
good.
is a rare skill now.
Yeah, I think it's actually been very good to have a little bit of discipline around writing, and in that period I also tried found I was really enjoying work with startups, and did a little bit of work like reporting on the venture sector in Australia. And just a few things that
this
all
little
pointed in that
journalism
direction.
thing keeps coming back, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I think I do love I love writing and communication and analysis, so it comes naturally, I guess.
Yeah,
I eventually felt pretty comfortable that I wanted to work on a business that was tackling a problem that I cared about, and I was going to go into the startup world.
And then you did.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, tell me about the beginning, because the starting it's the most exciting part, but two, you could literally end up going any direction, right? And tiny decisions can have massive impacts.
Yeah, definitely. So I launched Normal with Eucalyptus, which is a big venture-backed, for anyone who doesn't know it, big venture-backed, started as telehealth company. I think now you'd say broadly digital health company.
And how did you end up meeting those guys?
Interestingly, so I'd been doing the Start Name Women's Fellowship, which is a great program bringing women often from the corporate world, consulting, management, accounting, law, everything. People who want to get into tech but don't know how, into those professions, and through that had ended up working for two health tech company startups in Australia, and I hadn't meant to. These were the things that felt interesting. And one of them, I was working there, and I actually just through a kind of network connection, managed to reach Tim Doyle, who's the CEO of Eucalyptus. And I had a bunch of digital marketing questions about health tech to ask him, because I had this business had thrown me at digital marketing, and I was like, I don't know anything.
Someone help me. Tim, help me.
And so I had a chat with him for an hour, just asking him to basically tell me all of his mental models.
You got an hour of Tim's time. That's not an easy thing to do, ever.
Yeah, he was less busy then. But looking back, that was very nice of him. At the end of that conversation, he was like, we actually are planning to launch a fourth brand. It's probably going to be in sexual health or women's health. I think you'd be a really good GM for it. Do you want to actually come in and apply for it? And I was like, well, I've been thinking about sex tech for the last couple of years on my own time anyway. So I had the ideas already running around the back of my head about it for a while. I was like, I think that actually would be great. I don't know how to start a consumer brand, but I suspect that you could tell me. And so we got connected at that point, decided that we wanted to do the sex tech or sex education, sex toys brand, and that was it from there.
Who came up with the name? I love the name.
Oh,
so clever.
The name is an interesting one as well, because it was an intense process, and we were doing this in parallel processing.
Right.
So we were thinking about all of our visual branding, and we were starting to develop all the products, the physical products and packaging and everything, at the same time as we were also trying to think about the name, because we were like, we literally don't have time, so we've got to do all this at once.
Just do it all at once.
But we had gathered a long list of all the associations we thought we wanted a brand to suggest, or what we wanted it to feel like. We turned that into, I reckon it was maybe 1,000.
1,000
potential names. We also sourced them from the organisation, and despite my repeated requests that they not be stupid jokes, obviously.
You got lots of stupid jokes.
An organisation without many tech bros, you can get a lot of stupid jokes. But I was like, shit, that half of the list goes in the bin.
So we're down to 500. That's still a lot.
Yeah, I was like, the sheer amount of effort people put into those
stupid jokes,
the productivity that was lost, insane. But
it was a good creative outlet for them.
Yeah, I was glad that they got it out of the system early, and I was like, and now
That's very true,
working on this. But yeah, we had this like long list, and then we voted and got it down to a short list, got it down to 5, mocked it up with all the visuals so you can see what it's going to look like. And then it was a really interesting one of those situations where the name that no one hated but no one really loved was the one that we could all kind of agree on, which was Holiday. And so we sort of agreed on that in the meeting. I was like, I really don't feel good about this. Went home overnight. I was like, no, I think it's wrong. I came back in the morning. I was like, I'm really sorry. Like,
We're not doing it.
I was like, this is really annoying, but I think we should like start again on the process.
Start again. You didn't even pick the second one.
Not fully start again. We made a short list again. I think I didn't want to give any of the bros another go at the long list. But so I think we ended up in a position where the reason we didn't like Holiday, or the reason I felt Holiday wasn't right, was that when it comes to sex, I think so many of us have a mixture of experiences. Like we have really positive experiences. We have experiences that are about imagination and desire and curiosity and fun and pleasure. But so many people also have shame, anxiety, fear, pain.
Complete opposite.
Yeah, dysfunction. Like I think, and that if you're trying to do something big in the space, I think if you're only speaking to pleasure and you're not recognizing
you're missing out the other half of the audience.
you're missing the chance to build
Interesting
something.
thought process.
And I was like, for me, I'd sort of been through variations of those experiences as well myself, so I was probably quite passionate about it for that reason. But yeah, we ended up kind of going again, and I think when the name Normal came up and we realised it could be both fun and say something deeper, we were really happy with it.
It was a good call. Good call.
Yeah, one of those ones I was like, I don't love... I don't love breaking the vibe, but I was like, I think
I'm breaking the vibe.
Yeah.
So tell me, so you're doing this with Eucalyptus. So it's your company, right?
Well, I think.
So how's it sort? Because I know they sort of venture back, but I never really understood. I mean, like I said, we had them on the show, but we never actually really talked about the model.
Well, I think the model probably also evolved over time.
Yeah.
Like if you've seen the early Eucalyptus decks, I think those were very much leaning on like the history of like Procter & Gamble or like LVMH, like these big conglomerate style organizations where the assumption is like there's a lot of shared functions that you need to run a consumer brand. We can launch and run them more efficiently if we share those back ends, if we share learnings, etc. Share teams as well. And I think, over time, there's like a few evolutions that probably happened in that. So one of those evolutions would be launching the first brand, which was a telehealth brand, realizing that telehealth can be a really powerful mode, and also launching the second brand, Kin, right into COVID as well. So sort of seeing there's real like positive change to be made in healthcare, and also perhaps a more powerful company to be built in healthcare than just like broad consumer brands. And then, I think as well, like starting to realize the many pain points that anyone who's ever worked at a conglomerate would be able to predict for you of context switching for teams, of spending more time on resource allocation decisions than on execution. So the trade-offs of organizing yourself.
So are you actually getting any savings, or are they just invisible?
Yeah. So I think that like over time it's definitely become, I think that model's evolved less, like more away from brand driven to being like making big bets and doubling down. And obviously I think a lot of people would have seen the coverage of like the growth of Juniper and being one of the first to distribute GLP-1s style drugs as well in Australia. So
okay. And so that was only 4 years ago. Did you say 3 years ago? 4 years ago? 3 years ago?
Time is a wheel.
Gosh, that's crazy. And so you're still running Normal, but you're also doing other things as well on the side of that, right?
Yeah. So we sort of basically separated from Eucalyptus at the end of 2022. So from that point on, it's been fully independently run. From
right. So they're still shareholder or not?
No.
Okay, right. So you're running the business. It's your business. I'm assuming you have other investors now.
Not really.
Or is it just a
it's just a profitable business.
Profitable business? We need to get her off the show. We don't have profitable business. That's awesome. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, congratulations on that.
Yeah.
I mean, to me,
owning a P&L is an experience everyone should have at some point.
I love this. I've had a number of different companies and they've all been bootstrapped. So to me, it's natural to be profitable. Yeah. And I love this well, I haven't loved this change that's come through the last 3 years of swinging towards profitability. What a crazy idea. So to see someone and to have someone on the show is so nice. We do have, I think we've had 130 shows. We've maybe had 3 profitable companies. But yeah, it's awesome. So congratulations on
Thanks.
that. That's incredible.
No, I appreciate it. I think I actually do think for a lot of startup founders I know, or people who are looking for venture backing, I think there's a lot of value in actually trying to run a break-even or a profitable business to understand how P&L ownership works first. I think that it creates a discipline that is really good.
Well, yeah, you can only make decisions on how much money you have, as opposed to how much you reckon someone might give you at some point.
Totally.
It's a very different mindset.
Definitely. I think spending less time auditioning for and shaping perception among venture investors and more time thinking about your customer or thinking about how you can actually win in your space and what's a smart pathway to do that can be really valuable. I've certainly seen a lot of founders, just to what you were saying about the turn away from growth at all costs to profitability and a lot of tech investing. It's been really interesting the last couple of years watching lots of founders in the ANZ ecosystem, I think either feel very burned by that turn and sort of go through, I think, a maturing process around the type of businesses they want to run and whether they want to run venture-backed or certainly the trade-offs of a venture-backed business. Yeah.
Look, I get why you need venture when you're building tech, because it takes you a while, right? It makes sense.
You have to employ some software engineers. They're expensive.
They are. Yeah. But I also think that you talk about founders who feel burned. I mean, that means they never in their mind ever thought about how to make that business profitable. And that in itself is, I can understand you need venture, but you should still be aiming. Surely that's what the definition of a business is.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of what a social scientists would call demand effects around this, where founders see investors say things like you should never have an exit strategy, or see investors say things like forget about profitability, we want growth, or you need to be $1 billion business, or even at the point that some funds are getting to, you probably need to be a $10 billion business to return the fund. I think that there is sometimes a lack of understanding of the costs that pushing your business through that
create long term. I also think that some funds say things without any thoughts, and some people say things to founders that shouldn't be saying those things to founders within funds that aren't qualified to say those things. I mean, that happens in life, but I think there's been a scale of that. But the irony of it is you just said that a lot of having a venture-backed business is about creating perception.
It is.
When you get to the other end of the scale and you list it, you go straight back to that again. And I sold my first company to a listed company, and what I couldn't get my head around was that decisions were made quite blatantly that were bad in the long term because they were good for the short-term results, and that was what they needed to do at that time. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. But that's, you kind of go from one, it's only the ones in the middle that are actually running what you would call some sort of sensible thought process around how they drive their business. It's interesting.
It can be rational to manage narrative and do the storytelling and do the perception. I think, you can argue there are very successful tech companies that can borrow at way lower costs or can raise at way lower costs because they do that. It can be the rational thing to do.
Few and far between though.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's there's a difference between the types of founders who have the real story in their heads and then the narrative, and they're very clear on what's our actual kind of clear pathway to profitability if this doesn't go as we plan. And then people who are just storytelling and almost trying to just keep a little bit ahead of the market in the storytelling, but with no end game.
It's like sort of keeping your head above water, right? It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Startups is a weird place.
I know. Good though. Good and weird. Well, let's talk about your other ones. So there's a couple of things you're doing, right? So let's talk about education's massive, right? So you've got Fuzzy.
Yeah. And as I was saying at the start, the general idea with Fuzzy is it is very hard to succeed in particularly knowledge worker careers if you don't have mastery of a certain set of soft and generalist skills. I had the experience at McKinsey of getting these taught to me really well.
Do they teach those at McKinsey? I did not know that.
No, I think there are many things that I think are valid criticisms of McKinsey, but I think as an organisation, they do an incredible job of having a very clear culture and actually living that culture. And then they also do an incredible job of investment in people. probably through a couple of things. So one of those is as a business analyst in my grad role, I would probably have spent like at least 4 weeks of the year not working on client work and just being like flown somewhere to go do a week of intensive professional development. So
gosh, that's a lot.
Really, really structured, thoughtful professional development. Then I think the second pillar of that is role modeling. So you just get these opportunities to like sit in a room with a CEO and a senior partner having a conversation and see how they have that conversation. Or and then you get the with Dave Dyer, who's the head of the McKinsey Melbourne office, he described it to me recently. He was like, there's something that I think COVID has meant that we haven't been able to give a lot of this exposure in the way that we'd love to. But like the conversation in the cab afterwards and the breaking down of, hey, here's what happened in this meeting and here's what I took away from it. What did you take away from it? Like that kind of intensive thinking about
everyone's on video, right? There's no cabs, boom, gone.
Yeah, totally. And then feedback. You get just like, feedback like at least every fortnight for like 30 minutes from a bunch of people around you. So I think, and there's the feedback is really about not just like, can you build a model, but like, how do you communicate and how are you managing stakeholders around you and a whole bunch of stuff that I think is like often considered fuzzy or soft skills, hence the name of
soft skills. To me, in what I do, are everything, right?
Yeah.
That's what we have to look at. And I think I've learned this recently. Being a recruiter for 25 years, you read people without knowing it. Like you learn these skills, we all learn them, but as a recruiter, you probably learn more so than others.
Yeah.
Then when we went to video, it became super awkward and weird for ages.
Interesting.
Because
so your business changed because of that.
We had to because of COVID, right? So we're all doing videos and we're not seeing the little ticks. We're not seeing the way they stand, the way they dress, the way they walk. I mean, you're seeing different things, what they have in the background, right? Have they got washing? There's a whole bunch of other things. But I think what I've learned, and I was talking to a psychologist about this, I was saying it doesn't seem as hard as it used to be when we first went into that. So to give you an example, before COVID, I'd done maybe 5 video interviews in my life. Everything else had been face-to-face. Yeah. Since COVID, I've done 2 live interviews. Everything else has been video. So the swap was just not small. It was overnight, complete turn on its head.
Yeah.
And this psychologist was saying that she's been reading all these reports that humans have learned super quickly how to adapt to video and they're picking up different things and you're getting the same things you were getting before without even knowing. We've all learned super quick.
Yeah, so
I still think
we've
there's
become
difference.
less formal on video.
Yeah, we have. I think everyone's become comfortable on video. That was the difference, is everyone just looked like that. And they were looking at themselves in the corner. They're talking and looking at themselves because everyone's so self-conscious.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because it lends into a lot of what you do in the psychology of all of that. But it's quite. I think soft skills are everything. I think they're the hardest thing to learn if you don't have them naturally, and they're the hardest thing to learn or get better at if you have them naturally because you don't want to learn to get the better at. So they're really, really super important.
Totally. I remember like one partner at McKinsey actually saying to me, like, you get hired here for analysis, but you get promoted for people skills. Like you're, being able to manage teams.
You're a great advertisement for them today.
I know. and other times I have not been. But I think like for all that there are things about that model that I'd be like, oh, I don't love everything about it. I actually think like it's world class. It is for a reason.
Yeah. And it is world class. There's no question.
No, they're fantastic at it. And I think one of the things that I took away actually from that was the importance of breaking down soft skills and breaking down the mystique around a lot of soft skills. Like I think for many people we see, the ability to be a good communicator as innate, like either you've got it or you don't.
Yeah, which is not true.
Yeah, and even there's this association that it can be inauthentic to work on your soft skills. Like you should just bring your whole personality, warts and all, into work, and whatever
I've never heard that before. That's a ridiculous statement.
I know, it's bizarre to me, but I think it's something that comes up a lot for us when we're actually teaching people and working with people. Particularly the thing that got me started with this journey into creating Fuzzy was I started teaching negotiation and salary negotiation and equity negotiation.
Yeah, you touched on this before, which I think is fascinating. I never got taught that. I could probably do with some, to be honest.
I'm sure you'd be good naturally because you have lots of practice.
I don't know if I am. I never feel like a good negotiator. I see other people do it and I'm like a little bit in awe. So I don't know.
Well, maybe you should come do the course.
Maybe I should.
You're very welcome.
Is it is it personal or is it video?
No, it's all online, live cohort based. So
good job we're all comfortable on video now.
Yeah, and it's convenient. A lot of people can join very easily sort of after work or before work. But what has been fascinating when working with people in negotiation is that a lot of people will say, I'm just a really bad negotiator. And say things like, oh, to ask for more than I'd accept feels inauthentic to me, or to be
that's
firm.
madness.
Yeah, be firm in a negotiation. But I think that might be you speaking as someone who probably
That's
sits in a business where you have to do a lot of
it's very true, I do, yeah.
So a lot of people who are really great individual contributors, or even a really great team players, are really good at their craft, I think feel a conflict between that identity and the identity of someone who's a good self-advocate, or being perceived as aggressive or greedy, or any of those negative perceptions. So have never felt comfortable negotiating. And unfortunately, with something like negotiation, almost always the stakes are high when we practice. So part of why we created this was low stakes practice. But
it's also, I think, when you're negotiating, your audience is just as important as, you can't take the same style to every person. Some people, you are going to have to be arrogant and aggressive, where others you're going to have to be passive and more sort of empathetic, right? That depends on who you're negotiating with. So it's understanding your adversary, if you want to call them that, is probably more important than before you even think about what style you're going to use.
I think that's so true. Like definitely the best negotiators are adaptable. And I think also the best negotiators tend to have a really high level of self-awareness and emotional regulation as well.
Well, that comes with age.
Yeah.
Everyone tells you enough, you start to believe it.
And you're like, oh, whatever. I definitely think that there's a lot of value to almost being able to see, like, here are your triggers or buttons, and knowing, like, oh, if I know I'm going to react poorly to someone doing X, Y, or Z in negotiation, being ready for that. And there's a lot
of complexity. And look, we talked about this just before the show. There's these books, right? And I've read that book, Split the Difference. And I don't remember a lot of it, but I do remember he was basically a kidnap, hijack kind of negotiator.
Yeah, like FBI.
Very aggressive. Very, like, there was no room for negotiation almost in his style. And I think that's why I probably dismissed a lot of it, because that doesn't work in what I do. What are your feelings on these books? Because a book is very open to interpretation too.
Totally. And I think, there's two books that are kind of, I'd say 95% of when we ask people, what have you encountered about negotiation? They'll say, never split the difference, or they'll say, getting to yes. I think with all books around soft skills, they're helpful, but they're not complete, because I think
it's
public speaking is not something that you can practice effectively by reading a book. Like, you actually have to put your nervous system in the experience of doing the thing.
Awful.
And experiencing surprises, and it's really painful, and your comfort zone slowly expands. So I'd say to anyone who's reading books like that, they can be very valuable starting points, but definitely don't consider it a substitute for actual practice. I think as well, like that book, I'd say a very kind of, there's lots of parts of that book that are almost focused on like cognitive bias or manipulating.
That's right. I remember it's coming back to me now. It is.
Like paraphrasing and labeling and everything like that, which is very good. I think they're good tactics, but it's also helpful to be able to zoom out onto like strategy in a bit bigger way. A lot of the data around negotiation effectiveness basically shows, like, over time, the best results tend to be delivered by collaborative negotiators. So,
which is not what he was teaching, because there was no win-lose in a situation with a hostage, right? You just got to get them out.
It's a very binary outcome. So actually, like, it's probably a better negotiation style for zero sum. Yeah. But most, like I'd say most founders, for example, are not usually negotiating in zero sum world. It's like relationship based.
Very rarely, yeah. There's another book I've started reading, actually. I'm halfway through, called A Positive No.
Oh, I've heard of this, but I haven't read it.
I've just started it because I tend to be quite an agreeable person generally. I like to come to outcomes if everyone's happy, but I'm very bad at controlling the use of my time. That's why I'm reading it. I'm reading it to be able to say no to when people ask me to do things, because unfortunately, as things have become bigger and more successful, there are more people asking for more from you.
Yeah.
And when you start, you would know this being a startup founder, when you start, you say yes to everything, right? Because you have to. But then you have to retrain yourself to say no, and I'm good and bad at it. So I'll let you know, I'm literally just starting to read it.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to hear about it. But funnily, that actually just triggered a thought for me. For Normal, we run like workshops sometimes, and sort of do things that bring us into a closer environment with customers, and give us the opportunity to kind of do something in smaller groups. And one of the things that I've often seen our sex educator and my co-founder, Georgia, practice is getting people to say no and feel how uncomfortable it is to say no.
I think it is in all situations.
Yeah.
There's a level of uncomfort to it.
Definitely. And a great exercise can even be like saying no and then saying no with a reason and then saying no with a recognition of the other person's feelings, like just experiencing.
This is what I've been
the
trying to get better at. Is to say no in a way, but make sure it's very clear. And if you do give a genuine reason, if you say no, obviously the people think you're rude. But if you say I can't and this is why, people never get upset.
No.
Anyway, I'll let you know how we go on that.
Yeah.
And I want to go, and we've been going for a while, so we've got to keep moving. Otherwise,
sure.
people will start turning off the podcast. Talk about the last thing that you're doing now, which we had a little chat about. Which you explain it to me because it's not quite a business yet, right? No. It's called Grapevine, right?
Yeah. So and maybe I can go a little bit backwards to go forwards.
Yeah, perfect.
But I think. For anyone who hasn't spent time in the tech world and in the Australian tech world, I'd say it still remains quite male-dominated in terms of leadership, in terms of funding, in terms of who runs investing funds, and I think that combined with an industry that prizes often a very informal culture and almost like sees itself as anti-corporate or anti-bureaucracy and has a very ecosystem approach where people are often kind of floating between the boundaries of like a strict workplace and a social relationship, all of that combines to contribute to relatively high rates of sort of sexual harassment, bullying and bias in the sector.
Yep.
And myself and a number of other women sort of spoke up publicly last year. I think what started this kind of conversation back up was some really offensive comments made by a founder on LinkedIn. So I remember
this.
Yeah.
That was pretty bad. I mean, it was really bad.
Yeah. I think that to quote him, I think he said something like, "I'd fuck you and have an abortion," as a comment on someone's LinkedIn post. And he had been doing similar things to myself, a number of other women for a long time, and with relatively limited reaction from anyone around us.
Who says something like that? Ever in any scenario? I mean, even you saying it there, it's so offensive, right?
I think, the part of why I say it is actually just kind of like bring it home for people because I think it's important to recognize.
And they didn't publish what he said. I think you had to find it.
Yeah,
like it wasn't
it got
easily
deleted, basically.
Yeah, you had to really go out and look for it, I think.
Yeah, but I think that set off a lot of people suddenly being like, it was a wake-up call for a lot of people. I think a lot of women in the industry had been privately speaking to each other about this or trying to work within organisations on this for a very long time. So that started a bit of a public conversation. Myself and another number of other women spoke after that to the Fin Review.
Yep, I remember.
Basically we're just speaking about the fact that, while this founder had said something that was pretty terrible in a very public space and felt impunity to do so, actually, like, in our view, he was at the fringes of the industry. There were much deeper and more sort of systemic problems around this that were driven by the fact that we have all these risk factors for sexual harassment and we don't have a structured or planned approach to handling it.
Yeah.
And so off the back of that, we all texted each other and we were like, maybe we should be friends and like talk about this. From that grew an initiative called Grapevine. And the idea of this initiative is education and awareness and practical advice. So it's run by about 8 or 9 volunteers who are Vine makers, and essentially we receive stories of sexual harassment, bullying and bias from within the ecosystem, and we de-identify those experiences and share them and pair them with advice for stakeholders, and that advice for the stakeholders is sort of structured in order of power in the situation. So, what should the company have done here? What should the perpetrator have done here? What should, like, advice for the victim on what their options are? And that's been running for about the last 6 months, and I think has had a real catalysing effect, which has been amazing in the ecosystem, and we're starting to see a lot better conversations about it, but the work is definitely not done. Like, I think whenever you're thinking about culture change and prevention, it's very tempting to like get a news headline and think the problem's solved. And I think actually this work requires a lot more than that. So we're also sort of in deeper conversations about funding organisations that can actually do that in a much more systematic way as well.
Yeah, we should feature more of this stuff on Balance to Grind, I reckon. This is a good topic for that.
And I can suggest a few folks who might be good to speak to as well, who can talk about that Grapevine work as well, because they certainly, and for anyone who's like listening or watching, or you can go to askthegrapevine.com, or you can look us up on LinkedIn or Instagram, and you can see a lot of those stories. But it's everything from people like being roofied at work events and going to the board and not having anything done, to incredibly racist abuse, to massive power imbalances, and being like sort of invited to business dinners and then being hit on by someone with much more power than them in the industry. Like I think it's part of the reason why we wanted to start with stories, is to I think get us all to a position where it's no longer an acceptable thing to say, like, oh, I can't believe that's happening. And actually be like, well, you've like,
it is happening, and you know it. Everybody knows it's
and we're telling you it's happening. Yeah.
And here's all the real life examples that were last week, not last year, not 10 years ago. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I think that, you know, some of the harder work begins, but also the really valuable work. And I think maybe this is something to temper the gloom of talking about this topic, which is like, I do think that tech in Australia has the capacity to be the best working environment in Australia. Like, I think right now we're a decade or two behind the corporate world on these issues. But I think that we have the capacity, when we put our focus on things, to leapfrog and to create a lot of change around it.
100%. Yeah, we've seen it before. Well, I mean, let's keep following that, because there's a lot to do there. I mean, that's a massive topic.
Huge. But I think there's like a few like really good basic things that people can look up. Like, I'd really encourage anyone watching, like, look up resources on going from being a bystander to an ally in situations. Can be really good. Look up what best practice looks like for rolling out sort of HR prevention in companies.
We'll put a link in the bottom of in the bottom of the show for this.
That'd be great,
sure.
and I'm sure people can go and like find a lot of those.
They should be able to. Most people are pretty good at that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's busy times for you.
Yeah.
So obviously, here you are running a profitable business. What are the plans for that? What's the future of that look like right now?
Yeah, for Normal?
Yeah.
So at the moment we have just launched the first new product that we've launched in a couple of years. Been working on it for a long time, which is a butt plug.
Do you not have any at all?
No, this is our first.
Okay.
And I think where I see Normal going is that, firstly, we want to continue growing the business because it allows us to keep creating really good digital sex education. So like we create video courses, we create a big library of articles, we create tons of social media. Social media has been viewed like over 30 million times.
I love your social media. It's funny. It's the comedy side of it. Everything is great.
Yeah. The video courses are in 40 countries. And we really want to create like a high quality, universally available sex ed online. So I think growing the business allows us to do that.
Yep.
We have an incredible partner right now in Abby Chatfield, who is probably arguably Australia's biggest influencer. Amazing sex positive advocate for pleasure, really great at talking about difficult topics. And this is sort of the first of 3 products we're launching together. So we've got a couple more coming this year that are also, I think, going to help us kind of keep breaking taboos around pleasure and sex. So that'll be really fun. I'm personally obsessed with the idea of an ESOP style experience of a sex shop, and a Normal store that could actually be like a beautiful retail destination, and a place where you can come and experience workshops.
So not tacky, bright colours, plastic.
No.
A beautiful...
Like a store that is more like an art gallery.
Yeah, I mean, retail stores are going that way, aren't they? They are. So why not?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and I think your products, aesthetically beautiful. They are. They're not. They don't look like they were made in China for $1. That's the whole point.
I think we definitely want them to when we designed them, we were really focused on this should not be pink and purple. It shouldn't be like like the porny and corny aesthetic. We wanted it to feel like a beautiful lifestyle product.
Yep.
So I think continuing to build out that range and thinking about where are the spaces that maybe other brands aren't going, where we think we can really be part of a wave of normalizing that practice or that space, as well as having a really great classic range.
You'd look really great next to a July luggage store. They got the same. Have you been in their stores?
Yeah.
Same sort of thing, right? They're quite minimalist, but they would work really well next to each other. You should have a chat to her. We've had her on the show. You should talk to her about it.
Actually, I know Zoe pretty well. Yeah. So I've definitely done that.
Okay, good. I'm too late.
No. But it's definitely exactly the right suggestion. So I think that's certainly a place that we want to explore. So I actually, like, just before this, I was chatting to someone who used to work for ESOP as well.
Yeah.
And just being like, tell me everything about how you run a store. And it's incredible, like the attention to detail and the way in which staff are trained to make sure it's just like wonderfully welcoming. And I think on a product that for so many people is like them overcoming some internal barriers and getting comfortable with a space, you really need to design really well for that. That's something I would really love to do. We're opening up US shipping later this month, which should be cool. So I think like that's growth for the next year or so, and then we'll see where we are.
And look, we always ask this question because when people watch this show, a lot of people go, I want to work there. So if someone wanted to come and work with you guys, I don't think anyone can articulate it better than the person running the business. What is it like to work for Normal? Why would someone want to come and work for them?
There's a thing that I saw Reese Witherspoon say about her production company once.
Oh, this
which
will be
was like,
good. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. Well, she said, world-class DIY is one of their company values, which I definitely believe in at Normal. So like, people will be like, who's your designer? I'm like, me. Or like, we actually have designers who we work with, but on a lot of casual things, it's like, okay, everyone needs to know how to be on the tools and be willing to get their hands dirty in execution. So I think that's really important, like being able to come with low ego and just like a genuine passion for it. I probably talk about like high performance, high integrity is like the way I think about who you want on the team, which is coming to work to do really excellent work. And something that's important to me is actually like investing time in developing like staff members on the team as well.
That's your McKinsey background still coming through, isn't it?
I'm McKinseyfying them.
No, you're normalising them. It's much nicer.
It's actually much better word.
Much better word.
Yeah, so I think high performance and high integrity is really important. So like do the right thing when no one's watching. I think feeling really excited by the mission, but being excited by the mission isn't enough. Like we get actually tons of interest from people who,
I'm sure,
who would really love, like feel really, really passionate about the space. But I think sometimes being able to get comfortable with, okay, like our long-term goal is X. That means like at various points along the way, we're going to be making these like deliberate trade-offs between our social impact and our business viability to ensure we can get there. And so also being comfortable with that and being like excited by that journey. Like I think you have to love the growth and you have to love the mission. Yeah. So those things.
Good answer.
Yeah.
No one's ever said that before. I like that. I like when you brought those two things together. I have not heard anyone do that before.
Well, I struggled for a long time with hiring on this because I think I found it very hard to say no to people who were just like obsessed with the brand and
you need to read this book.
Yeah, loved what we were doing, and often come from like a very deep personal place on why they love it, and being able to say like, actually, we really appreciate that, but we probably need someone who can add like 10x value and can also like bring the mission, but is comfortable with the fact that we're going to have to like make these decisions along the way.
And sometimes it can be a negative. I mean, I've seen it in some of my previous companies when we dealt with sporting companies and things like that, or even sporting teams, right? People want to work for them because they're so passionate about it, but that's not necessarily the right person for this. Sometimes you need someone who doesn't like that sport at all to actually give you the best outcome.
I actually know entirely what you mean. Like, I think a lot of people are like, your job must be amazing. I'm like, my job often involves a lot of spreadsheets and meetings. Like, you know, like sometimes a vibrator is just a line on a spreadsheet. Like being comfortable with being with that, I think is really important too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or just finding joy in that. Like, I think you have to actually just like love each piece of it. So, come join Normal.
Good answer. I like it. I love the camera look. Look, thank you so much. I'm glad. Look, it was well worth having you on. Gosh, I'm glad we waited. I can't wait for that. Hopefully, it doesn't take 2 years. We have started to make a list of getting guests back on at relatively regular interviews, sort of every 18 months. So we should start talking to you tomorrow about coming on next time.
2026 interviews are ready to go.
We're booked in. But thank you so much for coming on. I've enjoyed everything, and it's a lot. You got a lot going on, and I appreciate that as someone who tends to do the same. We both need to read this positive notebook and start saying no to people. But it's been great having you on. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Yay.
Thanks for watching today, guys. Hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next week.